concluding on bodily functions, the endocrine glands are for emergencies, not for normal use. You get your energy from fats, proteins, carbohydrates. But in emergency situations, you will have endocrine gland activity.
Hormones that they make and dump directly into the bloodstream, then the bloodstream delivers them. That's why with adrenaline you can pump a lot of action or a lot of emotion, anger or joy or delight, manic depression, whatever you want. You get to experience it if you've got those hormones pumping, depending upon the condition of your body. So those glands are there to deliver hormones for different physical activity. Adrenal glands is usually muscular. Thymus, thyroid is usually to keep the heart and the lungs going. Your heart and your lungs go all the time, whether you're sleeping or not. Pituitary is involved in keeping the nervous system going all the time, sleeping or otherwise. Pineal gland, don't quite, everybody says it's the seat of consciousness, but I don't know anybody conscious enough to tell me if that's true or not. So, and I'm not conscious enough to know yet. So maybe someday I will. The spleen, I didn't talk about the spleen. The spleen, just like the gallbladder, it's a reserve of blood. The spleen does not manufacture blood. Blood is procreated in your bone marrow. Cellular division of red and white blood cells and growth of them happen till maturity in the bone marrow. Once they're matured, then they're delivered into the bloodstream, red and white blood cells. The spleen is a reserve of red blood cells. Let's say you have an accident. You were swinging from tree to tree, and one limb cut your throat, and you had a terrible bleed. You have about a pint of blood in reserve there so that you don't get weak and tired and get anemia from one bleed. Or another thing that can happen is you get very cold. So the kidneys start removing the excess H2O to thicken the blood, and the spleen dumps a lot of red blood cells into the bloodstream to thicken it, to stay warm. It can also remove red blood cells if you get too hot, to cool the body. And then the kidney will stop filtering out the H2O and allow more water to stay in the body to thin the blood so that it can stay cooler. So all these things are very simple. But when you get toxic, then they start doing things that they don't normally have to do. They have to work a lot harder and do jobs that they weren't designed to do. When you clean the body, and cleansing is a big problem, detoxification, get poisons in the body, does damage. How do you remove the waste? Talked about the lymphatic system. But the lymphatic system doesn't do it just by magic. It has bacteria, it has virus, it has fungus. There are all types of microbes that join in helping do that. It's like the intestines are the environment for the digestion, but all the bacteria, all the villi, all the secretions, all of that works to digest the food. Parasites are to help you digest food. They're not to eat you up. They're not to kill you. They help every animal's digestive system. And that can be proved if you go to Joel Weinstock, Dr. Joel Weinstock, who is a gastroenterologist at Iowa University. Over 20 years ago, he started noticing, he came from a farm background, and he noticed that the pigs at the agricultural department in his college were very sick. They were too clean, he surmised, because they had no trichinosis. They didn't have anything that was natural to the pigs that were out wallowing in the mud with all their bacteria and parasites. And all those animals were happy. So he took some of the trichinosis from these farm animals and introduced it into the intestines of these overly clean pigs. And they got happy and healthy again. So he got a permit from the FDA to try it with 6 people. 6 humans. And those humans had to have been under medical treatment for at least 10 years, up to 32 years. He chose 6 people that had suffered with inflammatory bowel syndrome from 10 to 32 years. If anybody knows inflammatory bowel syndrome, it's almost everything you eat and drink causes an allergy. It causes vomit, diarrhea, or severe nausea. Headaches, a lot. Intestinal cramping, a lot. Almost all the time. Anything you eat or drink, even water. So the FDA says that you have to be treated by the medical profession for 10 years before you're allowed to do anything else. Now that isn't a bunch of horse, I don't know. You know. Oh, well, you have to suffer with our system, even if it doesn't work for 10 years, you know, then you can go do something else. Not good. But he gave 6 people trichinosis. And we're told trichinosis, worst thing you could have. Kill you. Destroy your intestines, kill you. 5 of the 6 people in 1 week were completely symptom-free. People who suffered for up to 32 years were symptom-free in 6 days. One person didn't respond. He didn't have any side effects, no problem with the trichinosis, but all the other 5 got well. And guess what? They were back 6 months later asking for more because they started getting symptoms again because they kept to their old way of eating. They didn't adjust it. They just kept doing what they had done all their lives, doing the same old garbage, eating the same old stuff. So they started getting symptoms again. Now, if you go on to the University of Iowa, or, well, I don't think you can get it right off their website, but there's a group of doctors who now culture it, and you can buy it off the internet. Get your own little supply, your own little pets for your intestines. Now, what do parasites do? Intestinal parasites like that, they eat some of the meat to pre-digest it for you because you're not well enough to do it on your own. Now, that happened with, you know, when cavemen were around because they didn't eat meat as often as they needed to, or as we do, you know, 3 times a day. They maybe had it every other day or every 3 or 4 days. So when they finally got the meat into the system, they would eat and gorge so much. They had the gallbladder for the excess fat, but not the excess hydrochloric acid to digest all that meat. That's where parasites come in. Tapeworms, trichinosis. All of these things help you digest food. Now, there's plenty of research now. You can look it up. Look under whipworm, trichinosis, state of Iowa, and you will come up with a lot of hits on the last 12 years on the research that's been done with that, and you'll probably find the link where you can buy it. I'm not saying that's the way to get it. I suggest my clients take a piece of small intestine of a pig and eat about a half a cup, and that's all it takes for most people. Half a cup about every 5 to 6 months. Then their pollution is so bad that's dumping from their body into their intestines, all the trichinosis gets poisoned with all the garbage in our environment. You know, so then you have to breed some new ones or introduce some new ones into yourself. An example of that is the vaccine when I was 18 months old that caused me to be autistic. It also caused chronic constipation at that point. You know that the formaldehyde does that if it stays in the intestinal wall. So the formaldehyde went to my intestines and destroyed almost all the E. coli in my intestines. So my brain and nervous system weren't developing. That along with the mercury and the aluminum went into my brain. The way I know that is because I felt it. I started having headaches right at the center about 6 hours after I got the shot. And people say, "You remember at 18 months old?" I told my mother, I remember the day I was born. She says, "You're full of it. You're telling stories again." I said, "Well, I have stories to tell. Doesn't mean they're not true." So I said, Mom, think about this. When I came out, there were Venetian blinds right on the left side as I was coming out, and I was coming back looking at the ceiling. And the sun was coming right over the horizon, right through the Venetian blinds. Her jaw hit the floor because that's exactly what happened. Wow. So I remember everything. I may have been an idiot communication-wise, but in the brain I was very aware of all that. So yes, I remember all those shots. I lost some track of time between the age of 3 and the age of 6. Some of that time was lost after a few more vaccines, but then I picked it up again after that. Anyway, parasites. I had constipation from 18 months old all the way up until 3 years ago, almost 2.5 years ago. When I was a child, before I went on to a raw diet, I had a bowel movement once every 3 to 5 days. And when it came out, it was like granite, big as my fist. My rectum was 2 inches of scar tissue by the time I hit 20 years old. 2 inches of scar tissue completely around the rectum. Kept splitting. Every time I had a bowel movement, I bled. So about 2.5, and then I went on to a raw diet. I moved every day, several times a day, but that first part of the day, after a long night's sleep and not going from about probably 3 o'clock on, it was hard and big. So I was doing some experiments fermenting food, fermenting grain and fermenting milk, because when you want to clean out something, bacteria and parasites are your best advantage. Why? Because they consume toxicity 100 times their weight. Parasites can eat 100 times their weight in 24 hours and pass only 1 to 5% waste. That's like eating 100 pounds of food a day and having a 1-pound bowel movement the next day, or to a 5-pound bowel movement. That's pretty efficient, isn't it? Pretty amazing. Okay? And all of that excretion that they give is finely digested matter. And it's not toxic unless they're eating something toxic, because we put that into our body. And that feeds the brain and nervous system rapidly and readily. So if the parasites are in there as janitors, eating dead tissue and bruised tissue, it's not their normal job, but that's what they will do to help us clean the system. So I decided that I would help create bacteria by fermenting all the foods that I ate a lot of. When I was a kid, I ate a lot of milk. I loved milk. And I would down the half gallon to a gallon a day, cereal or whatever. So I decided, since I was an avid cereal, and then when I went off on my own, a bachelor, sometimes I'd eat 2 boxes of cereal a day and nothing else but milk and cereal, you know. And I was a junkie because I was diabetic, you know. I'd put 4 heaping tablespoons of sugar in Sugar Crisps, you know. So, and it was that bad. So, you know, I was fermenting everything I could and eating it. And I realized that, wait a minute, tapeworms live in third world people who live mainly on cereals and grains. Maybe I can finally get a parasite. You know, because I've been attempting to eat parasites. I've eaten parasites out galore. But because I had radiation therapy and chemotherapy, any time a parasite would start to eat something, they would be killed. So I had to use other means of cleansing, which is mainly virus, and I'll get into those later. Let me finish with the parasites. So I forced myself to get tapeworm, and sure enough, I downed all this. I mean, I let that milk ferment with some Macao powder in it, which is a root herb from South America, which reacts like cereals. So I fermented my milk with this Macao powder in it, and when I popped the cork of it, the top of the milk, I just went to smell it to see how mature it got. The alcohol literally burned my sinuses. My eyes turned red and watered, and I got a headache. That's how fermented it was. So I thought, okay, well, I'll drink it. So stupidly, I drank 3 cups. I didn't say, well, let me do a half a cup and see what happens. I had 3 cups. And the next day, I was supposed to be on a plane for Hanoi. So here I am on the plane with hives, huge hives, itching all over, going crazy. So as soon as I got off the plane in Hanoi, I got some tomatoes, put them in the refrigerator, and some cucumbers, and I had, took some vinegar with me because I knew that I was going to have hives very quickly after drinking all that fermented stuff. So I'm there in the hotel room, rubbing every hour, either rubbing slices of cold tomato on these hives are all over my butt and all over my stomach, all over this area right here. And I mean, these things are huge, big as my hand and as high as the hand off the skin. And I refused to scratch them. I wanted to see what was coming out. I didn't want my own nails and stuff to be in it. So I'm putting the cold cucumber and tomato slices on, mixing it around, because every hour it would get insane. And then other times I was getting into a cold bathtub with vinegar in it and rubbing that on and soothing it. So that went on for 3 days. Then all of a sudden I noticed in the toilet I had this little noodle. And I said, I don't eat noodles. I've got a tapeworm. So I started jumping for joy, So here's this little noodle, and I can see it moving around in the toilet. And if they drop on, they'll dry up like a piece of rice in about 5 hours. It looks just like a little piece of rice. You got this big, long, link of a tapeworm. And, tapeworms get pretty long. So I was there in Hanoi about 6 days, and I got a craving on the 7th day, the day I was supposed to leave. Who sits down and eats an onion like an apple? So I had this craving, so I sat down and ate this half of an onion like an apple. About 6 hours later, I get the runs. I mean, shooting. What came out? 48 feet of tapeworm. So I pull it out of the toilet. The hotel room I was in was all wood. I mean, the ceiling, everything was gorgeous. For almost nothing, $12 a day. So I spread it out on the floor so I could measure it to see how long it was, because it shrinks pretty quick. So I had, by the time I finished, it was probably about 45 feet, and I figured it shrunk about 3 feet in that 5 minutes. So I figured it's about 48 feet, 47, 48 feet. So I was all depressed, and I got rid of my friend. I finally got a parasite, and here I got rid of him. And, but I never had constipation since that day. Never had constipation. Then about 4 weeks later, I see another segment. So I know he's still alive in there. He, she is still alive, because they're bi. I knew he was still in there. So it must have been 3 months. Had a bowel movement. About 50 feet came out. Of course, I was at home at that time, and I spreading it out on the floor, measuring it. It was about 50 feet. And that's the last I saw of him for about 2 years. But I haven't had constipation since that day that I got him. Can you imagine? Everything was nice sized. I could go. Everything was nice. No hardened right there in the tissue. No lethargy. I had more energy. I felt better. Going to the bathroom was a pleasure instead of pain. Full experience, And that was a joy. So here, a parasite helped me. It helped these people with IBS. You have to consider that the bullcrap that's coming out of the pharmaceutical industry is intending to sell drugs. A diabetic. They say you're going to be a diabetic forever. The father of modern medicine, Hippocrates, used raw milk to cure all cases of diabetes. Put them on an all raw milk diet. Diabetes would turn around in 6 to 10 weeks. Every case, even if it were juvenile diabetes where an adolescent started with it or a child started with it. It was cured within 6 to 10 weeks. The pharmaceutical industry gets $1,200 a month. You're paying them $1,200 a month. It's a pretty good piece of money, and they don't want to let it go. So they don't want cures for anything because they like selling their drugs, and that's just what they're in the market for. And don't think that they're compassionate for 1 minute. And if you see, you've heard about the cigarette industry, putting things in their cigarettes to make people more addicted. Pharmaceutical industry is no better. They want you hooked. They want to make that money. Why they're so greedy? We talked about that before. Brain farts. What can I say? Something wrong, that the brain isn't working properly. It's malnourished, it is diseased, it is toxic. There are all kinds of reasons why people would do that to another person. Who can say? I was a very angry person. I mean, I used to think of a lot of harmful things to people that I don't anymore, now that I'm healthier. So I think that most everything is a process of toxicity in the body malfunctioning and the frustration in the body cells. You've got 67 to 80 trillion cells in your body. And if you're overworking them, burdening them, making them toxic, your little slaves are going to be pretty upset, not very happy, if you're not taking care of them. I guess they don't mind being slaves because they're our cells. But let's take care of them, treat them right. Okay, so parasites. Then we have bacteria. Bacteria can eat 50 times their weight in 24 hours and pass about 5% of waste. Still a great deal. Incredible deal. Bacteria is responsible for a lot of digestion. The University of Toronto, in association with the Hospital for Sick Children of Toronto, has been using the veratoxin, the waste product from E. coli, to completely dissolve human brain tumors in 2 to 5 days, including the vessels going to them, the tumors. 2 to 5 days brain tumors. So what I have to say about that, E. coli is in shit, eat shit and live. It's kind of a misnomer when they say you shouldn't die, isn't it? And I've had many people who were their cancers weren't reversing, and they started eating some buffalo manure in the bowels, and with the bowel with it a little bit, and they started reversing their tumors in months. I mean, radically, the third within 2.5 months. That's shrinkage. And why? Why don't they come out and say, eat feces? Every other animal goes around licking each other and themselves every day. Feces. And why is E. coli so bad? It isn't. It's all a fiction. Why? Because there's a whole plan. Dow, Monsanto, Gulf and Western are programming you to mistrust anything that is natural. They want you afraid of bacteria. They want you afraid of parasites. They want you afraid of insects. They want you afraid of everything natural. So guess what? You'll stop organic farming and you'll grow everything with chemicals. And it's planned. It is well planned. Who is in bed with the media and the pharmaceutical industry? The agricultural companies, the oil. Gulf and Western owns most of the, in Dow, agriculture. These are chemical companies. They're major agribusiness today. And they have one intention, and that is everything be chemically grown. And also they're manufacturing cloned animals, and they are patenting them. So guess what they're saying? Oh, you're going to have mad cow disease, we have mad deer, we have mad everything, so what we're going to have to do is outlaw all natural animals, and only those that are cloned are going to be allowed. Monsanto gets a percentage of every pint of milk that comes out of a cow that they own the patent on. They're going to draw money from everything. And it's very planned, and you better believe it. because it's moving very quickly now. They're getting ready to outlaw a lot of things, and they have you so paranoid about nature and bacteria and everything that most people are going to let it happen, just like they let the Nazis take over Germany. Because they get the people believing it. The propaganda is there. Will you ever get a good, healthy food again without chemicals in it? Not unless you own property and have a farm. And I suggest that everybody, everywhere I go and speak, people get together and start putting farms together. Even if you don't grow the stuff yourself, you get a farmer there that you pay to do it. Because you're not going to get access to anywhere, because it will be outlawed. I am fighting it in every state. And I've won in every state so far, because I put a bunch of clubs together with right to choose healthy food, and we put farms together, and we own, the people who own the farm, who have the lease on the herds and the animals, it's their food. They're not buying and selling food. It's their food. They're paying the farmer to take care of their cows, their milk, their product, their eggs, their meat, and then just give it to them. And they pay them for the service of doing that. So that's the way we set it up. The state of Michigan, Illinois, Ohio, and Illinois came after my farmers in the last 6 months, and I beat everyone in court. And you've got to do it too. You know, I can take care of a lot of people, but I can't take care of everybody. You have to find farmers who are willing to go to lease their herds, their animals with you, or you get land and you start them yourself. And that's what everybody needs to do, because we're looking at 2 years, and you're not going to be able to get any organic food. So you need to move quickly. You need to start thinking readily about what you're going to do about food.
FDA has approved 5 viruses that will be sprayed on meats to kill the bacteria. Now, the bacteria helps us digest. The viruses are nothing other than protein waste products that are poisonous. So they're going to poison our meats to save us from the very things we need to help us digest with, and that's bacteria. They tell us viruses are bad, and then at the same time they tell us to spray viruses on our meats to kill bacteria.
They're telling us salmonella is bad. Vion Products bought a license, Yale, and funded Yale to do experiments with salmonella for the last 15 years on reversing cancer with salmonella. 18 universities are now using it. Different smallpox virus, all kinds of virus and bacteria to reverse cancer. To eat salmonella. Let your eggs rot. Let your chicken rot. Eat your salmonella. It'll take care of you. It'll eat these dead cells that your body can't deal with unless you've had chemotherapy. It's not going to happen like with me. It's not going to happen. Then your body has to use virus. But we'll get into virus after we do fungus. Fungus is the next. It's in between parasites and bacteria. It consumes about 75% of what a parasite eats. And it has about the same amount of secretions. But when they secrete, their fluids and their byproducts, their verotoxins, cause intense drying. That's why when you have athlete's foot, it's so itchy. When you have crot rot, that's fungus. That's a yeast infection. In women who have the yeast infection, it dries out that tissue and causes intense itching. If you have plenty of fat in your body, you're not going to have that reaction when that waste product is discharged from them. Your body will usually naturally dissolve it, neutralize it, and it'll pass out through the pores or out the mucus if it's coming from the vaginal area or the rectal area when you get that rectal itching. So all those yeast, candida, all this candida garbage, Your naturopaths are just like the medical profession. They have the bad guys. And the bad guys aren't the chemicals. They're the natural things in nature. They are treated and they are programmed to think just like the medical profession, the allopathic method. Search and destroy. So your alternative therapists aren't much help because they're trying to destroy this, they're trying to destroy the candida, the parasites, everything that's natural in your body that's trying to work with you to get healthier. You have to forget all of that. You have to trust nature and realize the only thing that's causing you disease are the poisons that are coming from industry. That's medical, that's the agricultural industry, anybody who puts chemicals in your food. I don't care if it's just coloring. Do you know what yellow dyes 16, 13, 5, 7 have? You know what makes it yellow? A heavy metal. A heavy metal that causes kidney cancer. Cadmium. Had a patient whose father, right over here, Jeff, had kidney cancer, right? Kidney cancer. So I said, Jeff, you want to know what caused your father's cancer? Take a piece of the kidney and send it to a lab and see what heavy metals are in it. Came back high in cadmium. You go on the internet, what kind of cancer does cadmium cause? Kidney cancer is one of the top. So anytime I want to know why my patient has cancer, I take some of their vomit, their diarrhea, if they're having diarrhea at the time, or some of that tissue that has cancer in it, or the actual tumor, take a piece of that and have it analyzed. Had one patient, thought she was going to live for sure. She was pretty young, only 38 years old. She was awfully thin when she came, but not extremely thin like Twiggy, but you know, she wasn't skinny. She was just at a good weight. And for somebody who has cancer, I say, get fat. So I got her to put on 25 pounds, and I wanted her to put on 35, 40 pounds, you know, because the cancer was here in the breast. So she didn't do it. She only put the 25 pounds on. So when she started dissolving the tumor and all the secretions started eating away at her tissue, she was vomiting and having diarrhea. She was weak and in bed that whole time. And the vomiting was intense. It hurts, especially when you're throwing up poisons. So after 2 months of vomiting, I had to find out what was so toxic that she could be vomiting this violently, because I had only known one other girl who had done that, vomited like 11 times a day, 6 to 11 times a day, and that was Awanza, and she had 63 tumors in her body, and there were innumerable ones in her brain, so I understood all that heavy metal was dumping and causing her to vomit all the time. But this girl, I didn't know what. So I took that 4 ounces of vomit, sent it to the lab. The lab called me a week later and said, you know, when they finally got around to my sample, and they said, somebody's poisoning your patient. I said, what do you mean? He said, she has 3 times the lethal dose of thallium in that 4 ounces of vomit. 3 times the amount that usually kills a person, of thallium. Thallium is a metallic mineral that's very much like mercury, but it's a cross between mercury and lead in its toxicity. And I said, no. Now I know why. She was a jewelry maker. And she never wore a mask and she never wore gloves. So all of that metal she was burning with her head right over it, breathing it in all of those years, all of that thallium, heavy metals, caused her cancer. And she didn't make it. She got down to 2.5 months of vomiting and all of that. She was down to where she was starting to get too thin and she just couldn't eat. She died because she couldn't eat. Cancer was all dissolved. It was the end of it. She couldn't eat. That's why I say, get fat, because you don't know what poisons are in your body that are going to come out and start moving. And if you don't have the fats to take care of it, you're going to have problems. So fat, 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 fat. Get rid of thin. I want to look good. I want to be thin. Forget it. It isn't healthy. If you've been on as long as I have and you've got most of the poisons out, you can be fat and not look it. But that takes a little time. Takes a little time. 30 years. 30. But I had chemo and radiation. Most people probably would take 15, 20 years, I have some young people that do it in 7, 8 years. Fat for 7, 8 years and then get, full and strong looking, like an athlete, not skinny ever again, because I don't want anybody to ever get skinny again, unless their body's taking through a detox and they use up all the fats, but then they need to put it on quickly after that. So poisons in your environment, in your food, in your air, in your water, wherever it is, those cause your diseases, not bacteria, not parasites, and not virus, not fungus, not candida. Those are your friends. They're trying to get rid of damaged tissue from poisons. They're your helpers. You got to help them. Now, virus. How many people know that viruses aren't alive? It's been known in the medical profession for years that you don't give antibiotics for a virus because they're ineffectual, because they're not alive. They have no nucleus. They are protein parts. There's no respiration. There's no functionality. There's no glandular activity. They are not alive. But what are they? They are soaps. They are solvents. The body makes them to dissolve tissue in your body that are too toxic for the parasites, the bacteria, and the fungus to eat. Too toxic, like when I had chemo, radiation. Parasite, bacteria, fungus tried to eat into that dead tissue, they were killed because they were poisoned to death from that tissue. So what's all this contagious bullcrap about virus? That's like saying laundry soap is contagious. Well, it's in every home, and everybody uses it at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, or between 11 o'clock and 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Most housewives and people do their laundry. So it must be contagious, because it's always happening about the same time. That's when colds and flus happen. They happen seasonally for a reason. There are 300,000 varieties of virus. Each one of them takes just a little particle of a cell at a time and disassembles it. And the pharmaceutical industry says, see, it dissolves a cell. No, it's dissolving a specific tissue in that cell, so specific that it can never damage the integrity of that cell. Unless you have many viruses happening at one time because of a highly toxic polluted cell from industrial pollution. And it's usually from the medical profession that happens. But usually 1, 2 viruses are occurring all at one time, only once in a lot of people. So, one person gets, the flu, then the next person gets the flu, and Joe Blow across town's got it, and all of a sudden, all these people start cropping up, and they say it's contagious. That's like saying the first the rooster that starts crowing toward the sun is contagious to all the other roosters, because they get up and crow too, Viruses are not contagious. AIDS is not contagious. It's a man-made virus. It's the lymphonomic virus of a sheep, and it's the leukemic virus of a bovine, spliced together. Man-made. Injected into our population by our dear great military government as biochemical warfare experimentation. And do you know who there were undesirables were they allowed to do it on? NSA says they're allowed to do it on undesirables. And you know who the undesirables were? homosexuals. So homosexuals in New York, Houston, Los Angeles, and San Francisco were the target. How did they target them? Well, if you remember in the 70s, all through the 80s, the main people getting hepatitis were homosexuals because of their intense drug use. So they were given it in the hepatitis B vaccine, and they were strategically put in those cities. 10% of the people were not homosexual. That's why 10% of the population was not homosexual who got it in those cities. But it only happened in those cities. And then when the government got caught, it started putting them out in other cities, so they got it all over. And then they put it in the smallpox vaccine in Africa. Why would British government and the American government donate 125 million smallpox vaccines? Why would they give 125 million vaccines? You're talking billions of dollars to make them, transport them, to get them over there and service them. 125 million vaccines were given and funded by the British government and the American government. Why do you think they did that? What happened? It made a medical catastrophe in all of those countries. So where did they go for medical help? They went to the British and American governments, who were supposed to be advanced medically. So they got treatment, and guess how many countries are now under the World Bank because they couldn't pay their debt for the medical help? 27 African countries are now run by the British and American government through the World Bank because they poisoned these Africans with AIDS in the smallpox vaccine. Nobody got AIDS there except people who got the smallpox vaccine, unless they were getting transfusions from somebody who had the smallpox vaccine. So you can get it, transmit it in blood, but you can't transmit it sexually, you can't transmit it any other way, because it has to be injected into your body. You bleed outward, so you can't get it even if you have anal sex and you bleed. You bleed outwardly, you don't bleed inwardly. And if you have, Dr. Strucker showed that there are only 2 viruses per ejaculation. 5 white blood cells destroy 2 easily like that, they'll never get in. And like I said, they can't procreate. They don't reproduce because they're not alive. Viruses are not alive. They are made by cells to clean the body. It is a solvent, a soap. Just like when you have runny mucus, your body has made a solvent, which is a viral type element, which cleans and causes your nose to run heavily because you've breathed in something and it's lodged in your mucous membranes. It happens especially with people who don't produce proper mucus fibers. Mucus, if you look at it under a microscope, is a web. It looks like cloth. You have all these protein fibers that mesh, so it's layers and layers of thick, so particles can't get through and damage your sinuses. When people don't produce good quality mucus and they're protein deficient, these fibers are too wide open and the particles pass through and hit their sinuses and they have allergies. Mucus is too thin. It needs to be thicker, needing lots of protein like eggs. So when that passes in, it causes an irritation and your body creates a solvent to make it run and flow. Not a bad thing. It's a good thing. Viruses are good things. The body's making them for a reason, to get rid of damaged tissue so that you can reproduce new tissue and be healthier and alive. If you keep dying, if your cells keep dying and you don't reproduce them, what happens? You're the old person trying to walk across the street, a little at a time. And if you're reproducing, you're going to go like me, from death to life. You know, from death at 21 to life at 60, and getting healthier every day. Like I said, I haven't slept, I had a nap between 6 o'clock and 10 o'clock last night. I'm not even tired. One time I went on 1.5 hours sleep a day, 10 minutes at a time. And I only ate an egg or half a cup of milk or half a cup of meat every hour. Just a little bit to give me enough nutrients, not to be overly satisfied, but to be slightly hungry. And it just kept my energy up and going that whole time. And then when the 22 days was up, I only slept 5 hours the next night. Didn't need to catch up on anything because I took care of my body. I gave it food every hour. I gave it protein, I gave it fat. And I didn't eat any fruit that whole 22 days because I wasn't going to sugar out. It wasn't going to cause any cravings. I wasn't going to cause distortion of mental functions with the advanced glycation end products. If you know how to utilize your body and work with it, man, you can have a great life, a really great life. Okay, so we've gone over all of your friends, which you thought were all your enemies. Your parasites, your bacteria, your virus, your fungus, your candida, your athlete's foot. And let me tell you, 99% of the athlete's foot comes from vaccines, antibiotics, mainly penicillin. Most of your fungus that is caused in your body is from penicillin and antibiotics. All of you women with your yeast infections, antibiotics, penicillin. And they start you off very young with it. You know how often people had athlete's foot before penicillin and antibiotics came out? Zip zero. Can't find it in any of the medical records anywhere. Not even in Greece and Rome. Nobody had crotch rot, or foot decay. Didn't exist. Yet we have it all over the place. I'm in Asia a lot. Never see it there, except in the farmlands. But in the people who are giving all kinds of antibiotics, of course they have lots of fungus, lots of yeast infections. So you wonder where all your fungus and your candida and all that came from? Doesn't come from your food, but you can certainly eat badly to feed it more, to give it more to feed on. You can damage your tissues with sugars. And of course the fungus will help feed on it because the penicillin and all the other molds that are in antibiotics are sterilized. But you have to remember, fungus can live through anything. It's like the phoenix. It will come through fire and live again. That's why plastics took so long to become so popular. You know why? Because plastic is mainly made from fat, vegetable oils. Overly hydrogenated vegetable oils is what plastic comes from. Hydrogenated vegetable oils all have the same molecular structure of plastic because it is plastic. It's just a soft liquid plastic. So they kept making plastics, and what happened? A year and 3 months later, they'd start molding. They'd get a fungus. They couldn't stop it. But they wanted to produce it. So what did they do? They created dioxins, mold retardants, mold killers. And where do those dioxins go? Into our entire planet, everywhere. And those dioxins are some of the worst toxins on this planet. They are highly carcinogenic. But that's the only way they can get plastic to stop molding. So these are intentionally poisoned plastics that your children play with and put in their mouth and off gas. Now they're making clothing, sheets. Clothing and sheets and towels and everything with plastic. Polyester. Plastic. I'm jumping a little ahead now. Plastic, fibers, any kind of material, lint. I don't care what it's made of. Silk, cotton, linen, polyester, any of those unnatural ones. Even rayon is called natural because it's made from pine needles. How do you have to make it from pine needles? You know what you have to go through to make it from pine needles? You have to put an epoxy in it. Turns it into a plastic. The oil from the pine needles is very high. It's a vegetable oil. You hydrogenate it, you've got plastic. But they call it natural because it came from a tree. But when they get finished with it, it is not natural. It isn't like cotton, it isn't like silk. It is a plastic. It is highly treated, highly chemicalized. And every time you breathe in plastic, your body has to digest that plastic. How well do you think you digest plastic with all those dioxins in it? Like I said, you have disease, you have allergies, you have ill health problems, not because of anything natural, but because of the poisons in our society. You have to learn how to protect yourself the best you can. You're living in Los Angeles, you're going to be breathing it every day. There's no way around that. So the way that you can stop it and otherwise, get rid of synthetic rugs, sheets, bedspreads, anything in your home that will go into particles and you will be breathing, because they will. Anything that is fiber, lents. Your furniture, everything, make it, with cotton furniture, silk, upholstery, everything. Everything in my house is natural. There's not one unnatural thing in there for that reason. Your body has to digest in the lungs, in the sinuses, in your esophagus, in your bronchioles, has to digest fibers of plastic. How well is it going to do that, and how toxic is it going to be to you? You're going to have a cold and a flu every year, 2 or 3 a year if you're doing that, to expel that kind of poison. And if you're not getting, until somebody says, I'm so healthy, I never have a cold or a flu. I said, buy in your 50s. Because it's true. Anybody that doesn't have a cold or a flu in their life and they go through, they usually die in their early to mid 50s of a heart attack or a brain aneurysm, because they just dry out inside. All those poisons stay in, they're not getting rid of them, and they just keep absorbing all the fats and they dry out and crack, either in their brains or in their heart. It's up to you to handle it. I'm just giving you the best tools to protect yourself the best you can, because we are living in a very diseased world. When Dr. Samuel Epstein says that 1 of every 2 men will die of a miserable cancer, 1 of every 3 women, that's serious business. That's serious business. And we're talking about America. We're not talking about anywhere else in the world. We're just talking about America. In other countries like Laos, poverty-stricken, the lifespan is like 89, so it has to do with the particular industrial progress we have, and the building materials we use that are so toxic. So you have to make sure that things are cleaned, and when you clean, wear a mask. So if any of these dusts and particles fall from paint or whatever it is, you're not inhaling it, because your body will have to deal with it. It's not an illusion. Your body's going to have to deal with it. If you think you can walk through smoke and none of it's going to touch your lungs, hey, you're different than me. You're different than any other human I know. When particles are airborne, you breathe them in, your body has to deal with it, period. There's no other way about it. Now, you'll look at, I think it's page 4 in your papers there. Isn't that B1? No, that's the lymphatic system. Page 5 then. There you go. See pictures, see 2 pictures there. The microscopic view on the left is of food, of vitamin B1 isolated from food just by separation, no chemical change. And if you do it by hand like that, it's a very tedious process, because you're doing it with an air gun Very tiny air gun. It has to be so soft you're moving them around. So it's unreasonable to get that kind of vitamin B, because nobody's going to sit there under a microscope and filter out all of that and sell it to you for $2,000 an ounce, because that's about what it would cost. So they make chemicals to fractionate it and separate it. But you see what happens on the picture on the right there. You see what happens to all those little nice round little fluffy little creatures. That is vitamin B1. They become hardened rock and crystals from the solvent reaction. And that's from food. That's not even synthesized ones. I couldn't find a synthesized one. I looked for it. When I was doing my own biochemistry research, they were 100 times the size, just like vitamin C. And vitamin C, when it's natural in food, looks like little furry little balls, and they're all very colorful and in soft colors. And it looks very beautiful, and you can see it's vibrant and alive. And then you see this synthetic ascorbic acid, and you see these little bitty tiny little vitamin C's that are natural, and you see 100 times the size of this is all this little, looks like broken glass. Somebody broke a mirror. And they sell that as vitamin C. This is synthetic ascorbic acid, and it goes down and cuts and rips the body to pieces. Of course, it's going to stop any symptoms, because the body's panicked about stopping all of the cellular and intestinal and respiratory, venous, lymphatic, neurological slicing and ripping to pieces. So all symptoms are going to stop. If you have allergy, it'll stop that. It'll stop almost anything temporarily. But you're in real trouble later, because the body uses tremendous amounts of fat to bind with all of that toxicity from the ascorbic acid. Even if the vitamins come from a natural source, but have to be extracted with chemicals or any other process, as you can see in that picture, it changes the molecular structure, and the body cannot digest it and utilize it the same. It's an entirely a different creature. It isn't like milk, where you can take it and make cheese with it, and it still has a very good property on its own. It's very different, because there's a chemical process or a heat process that always goes into that separation. So there's always toxicity. Doesn't mean that the natural B1 vitamin or vitamin C will be harmful in an extreme way and cause disease, but it will certainly cause some problems in your system. But the synthetic will definitely move you toward disease quicker. May seem like it's working temporarily for a brief time, but in the end, later on, it's going to take its toll, and you will dry out inside. When I worked at Aunt Tilly's in Beverly Hills, one of the biggest health food stores in the world at the time, in the late 70s, I used to watch, and a lot of people come in and buy $10,000 worth of vitamins a month. And I'm talking about bottles of vitamin E, 2 or 3 of them a month. And guess where vitamin E comes from? Film developing fluid. Yep. Fuji and Kodak, big suppliers of it. You know why? It was a very toxic substance. They had to spend millions of dollars to put it in isolated stainless steel tanks with thick concrete walls that were almost 12 foot thick. Cost them hundreds of millions of dollars a year, and they had to keep that, they had to continue it, because they hadn't found any way to neutralize that chemical. Then one of their scientists, many of their scientists were paid to find out a use for it and a breakdown, and one of them said, oh, well, it has the molecular structure of vitamin E about 73%. Let's call it vitamin E, and sell it and have people eat it. One of the most toxic substances on this planet. 99% of the vitamin E out there is coming from that source. film developing processes. Even when what it says, natural vitamin E, you may have 5 units from soy or corn. The other 95% will be from Kodak or Fuji. So what happened with some of my famous movie star patients who were taking all that vitamin E for their skin started tearing, got translucent thin. Why? Because that's a solvent. Terrible solvent. Even aspirin can be deadly. I have an actor friend who used to run a 100-mile marathon once a year. He would take 2 bottles of aspirin to get through it. 2 bottles of aspirin. So at the end of that run, he had to stay isolated for 3 weeks in his apartment. Why? Because aspirin thins the skin. His skin would act like toilet paper, just tear. You could just touch it just like this and his skin would just tear off. So he had to isolate himself for 3 weeks. The stuff that the medical profession, pharmaceutical industry is putting out there is not good stuff. It poisons you. So, vitamins, supplements, all of that, you're not going to have anything but an imbalance if you're taking a supplement. Your body's going to have to leach something from itself or your food, and that's going to cause other imbalances. You're going to be like on a seesaw, always trying to balance yourself when you're taking these vitamins and enzyme supplements. It is never a way to do it properly. You can do it with foods. There's always some food in there that'll correct your balance evenly. Sometimes you've got so many toxins in the body that are so radical and so damaging that you're going to suffer. It is inevitable. You may have some penicillin that comes out under a thumb or a big toe. It turns black and pusses and it melts the toenail away. It's painful. But you can get through it so that you're not going to poison the body with medication and vitamins and supplements that are just going to add to the problem later. So that you'll have an inflammation there later or in a close proximity to the same area. Because that's what happens. If this area is so damaged and wasn't able to repair, it'll go to an adjacent area. That's why cancer metastasizes. The doctors say, oh, we cured this cancer. It's been gone for 5 years. You had it in 10 other places in your body, but we cured you of cancer. Hello? Does that make any sense? I mean, it's an absurdity that they can get away with making the claims that they do. 17% of people survive over 5 years through the medical profession with cancer. It's only 17%. That's a horrible statistic. But they like that 5-year point because they know that 6th year, probably 60% of the people they treated are going to get that cancer or another form in that next 6th to 7th year. Always happens. So they know to make that 5-year cutoff. Why don't they make it 7? Why don't they make it 8? Why don't they make it 10? Because they know at 5 years, that's when the shit hits the fan. The cancer crops. Stay away from the medical profession unless you have to. Now, I hadn't seen a doctor except for a test, those tests at Washington University Medical Center. And all of a sudden, about June, I started having terrific pain in my penis and groin area. Now, because when I was a child, I always had this problem of urination. It would take me 3 minutes to start urination, and then 2 to 3 minutes to urinate. So it was like I was a tiny little baby. I always had this little stream. My penis wasn't that small, but the stream was. And so My mother used to, you know, when I got about 4 years old, she would slap me on the back and say, hurry up, come on. Why does it take you so long to pee? I didn't know what she was talking about. You know, I was just trying to pee. Why was she hitting me, you know? I didn't understand all that. So, you know, I went through life like this. Still up until last June, it would take me 3 minutes to start peeing, 2 to 3 minutes to finish peeing. It was my natural life. I didn't know anything else. That's the way it was. I saw other people, but I never compared myself to other people because we're all so different. So I said, well, this is natural for me. This is what's happening. So all of a sudden last June, I started having terrific pain in the penis, and there was nothing wrong with my penis. So I went to a urologist just to see what was going on. I allowed him to do a ultrasound. He found the biggest stone that anybody in his whole office had seen. It was this long and this big around. And it had been developing for 50 years, 58 years, somewhere around there. So it had to have developed when I was very little. He found that my urethra hadn't grown over infancy. It still stayed that very thin little tract all the way from the bladder to the base of the penis. That little tract all the way through the prostate was just thin and never developed over infancy. So he said, well, I can go in there and blast it to pieces with a laser. The laser will take me probably 35, 40 minutes to blast it. So, you know, that's from experience. He's used to doing that, even though this was a big one. He can usually take them and blast them apart in 2 or 3 minutes. You know, I know one of my patients, he took 10 of them out, you know, in like 45 minutes. He had 10 of them in him. And I had one big one. It took him 2 hours to blast mine apart. The entire center was mercury from all those vaccines, had collected in my bladder from when I was an infant. The whole center was black, and I had the fluid tested. Mercury. Concentration of mercury that was out of sight. 2 hours to blast it apart. Let me tell you, I was downing the cheese like crazy because it was in a fluid, so a lot of it washed back into my system all over. And the area in the intestines, in the iris, showed all these metal speckles that I didn't have before, just riddled with all these metal speckles. So I'm still cleaning that out. So sometimes surgery is necessary. I would have had to let him go in and cut it out, or he had to go in there and blast it out. So, you know, when I went into the operating room, they had these big metal tubes this big, and I said, oh, shit, they're going to put that up my penis? Oh. I'm going out for this. I mean, I've had teeth pulled with no Novocaine, no nothing. No xylocaine, completely without anything. Just let them go in there and rip a tooth out. You know, plus the nerve popped out from here down, over here. And I knew that the pain lasts the most 3 minutes. If I can get through that 3 minutes, I don't have to spend 1.5 years getting rid of the Novocaine. It's going to harden and damage other teeth and other bone structures and everywhere else around. So when I do dentistry, which is occasionally, I don't use any form of painkiller. But this, going up my penis, that big tube, I was going under. I said, I'm glad I'm going under for this one. And let me tell you, they did stretch it that big, because when I came out, that was pretty painful. But I was over the pain. I had my pain formula. I took it. I had it ready for me when I got out of the operating room, when I became conscious. But they had me under a long time because they thought it was only going to be 35 minutes. It was 2 hours to blast that thing. He said the nurse said that he was just dripping sweat, because he couldn't get the thing to break up. It was metal. It was hardened metal in there that he had to break up. So that was in my body. I will go to a mechanic if I need one. And to me, doctors are only mechanics. They're high, overpriced mechanics and drug pushers. That's all they are. So, but I will go to them if I need them. And that's the first time I needed one, you know, for something like that. I had the first patient that I sent to a surgeon 3 weeks ago. He was an older man. He had a tumor this big When he came to me, it was about this big. And I said, you know, you've got a lot of tissue hardness in your neck and all in your shoulders, and you've got a tension in your back that's like this. I have a feeling that your tumor is going to grow. It's probably just benign, but it's going to grow quite big. But we'll see. We'll keep you on a diet where it'll never attach. So I kept an eye on it, and I could always move it, so it never attached to the bone. Then I could see that it was at the point where it wasn't going to grow anymore, and he'd stood it for 2 years and 3 months. So it was huge, huge. And it was getting to the effect where it was bothering his eyes and everything. So now it's time to get it removed. So we went through a lot of surgeons, man, because I told them what they could and couldn't do, and they hated that. And then we found the head of surgery at Kaiser in Hollywood, and Dr. DeFranzo. And let me tell you, I just told him, hey, you know, he says he wanted to remove all the lymph glands in his neck for this tumor. I said, wait a minute. That's what you're told to think. But think about this. If the lymph system is responsible for removing dead cells, it's going to have cancer in it. But if that lymph gland isn't as hard as rock, it's not a problem, is it? So let's leave anything in there that's not as hard as a rock, and the only thing that was hard as a rock was this big thing. And that one particular gland that it was full and kept stretching, one gland. No other gland was hardened. Swollen, yes, and doing its job. And I got that doctor to agree to think. I made him think. I said, think about it. You've never tried this before. If the lymph gland is responsible for cleaning the body, even cancer, isn't it the best idea to leave every lymph gland you can in the body? Because then it will help dissolve these tumors, these dead cells, and get rid of this cancer easier. If you remove them, where's the cancer going to go? Is it going to go down under here where the next batch of lymph glands are? And if you look at page 3 or 4 in there, you'll see the system, the lymphatic system through there. It's prior to that page. So you see that. You see how it is in a man and a woman. Of course, a woman has a little bit more in the breast area. She's more protected. A woman has more fat in her body, and that's why women live 20% longer than men. That's why 1 out of 3 women instead of 1 out of 2 men die. Women have a lot more fat, and also they have 20% more vaginal secretions, that much more mucus discharge. So they discharge 20% more poisons than we do. We men do. So penisivity isn't such a good thing, is it? We should be having vaginal envy, you know?
Thank you.
So be happy you're a woman, be happy if you're a fat woman. The lymphatic system was very important, so I got Dr. DeFranzo to agree. And man, it was like pulling teeth, but he listened, he thought about it. And I said, I can tell you right now, I've got this guy on a diet that didn't attach to his bone. It didn't attach to his jugular, because they told him if it, wrapped around his jugular, because they're used to seeing it, people on a normal diet. But I know how to regulate it. If it's going to grow, I'm going to control its growth. So they said they may have to take out the whole jugular. They'd lose a lot of his nerves and all of there, and all of it was under the tumor. Nothing was removed, just the tumor. And the skin, of course, that it attached to the skin. So he had all this excess skin, so all that skin was removed. Now he looks younger on this side, because all this is clean, and this side is his old natural self. So he's young on this side and old over here, so it worked for him. He was able to discard all of that tumorous stuff from here to here. He's much more relaxed now. He moves. He used to be like this. Now he's relaxed. He's moving. He got rid of all those dead cells that caused that tightness throughout his system. Whether any more will develop, I don't know, because he has a lot of toxicity in his body, and he was around, he's a computer programmer, so he's around those, 3 laser guns for 40 years of his life. Those monitors have 3 laser guns, and they shoot for 27 feet. So anybody who has a monitor, get rid of it. At work, I don't care where it is. You get a flat screen. The radiation and fallout is just this far, just about an inch, inch and a quarter off of the screen, and will never harm you. But like those old televisions, anything that's not a flat screen, they broadcast for 27 feet. You can always look at the work of John Ott, O-T-T. He studied them heavily, and it was 27 feet, the fallout, on a TV and a computer monitor. So you get an LCD screen. And if you got a laptop, you get a separate keyboard, because that EMF field will cause carpal tunnel. All the hype is, carpal tunnel isn't from electrical anything. It's from the angle that you type at. Let me tell you, when I was typing in high school, it was those old hard things where you had to drive them down that far, and then the pen had to hit the bar. That was work. Nobody got carpal tunnel. Nobody got carpal tunnel until the electric typewriter came out. And then the computers, everybody gets it. The electromagnetic field coming off of these computers is horrendous. Keep your tower 3 feet away from you. If you have a laptop, you put a separate keyboard, you plug it in, and it has to be 6 inches. The top of the keyboard has to be 6 inches from the bottom of the laptop, the notebook. And then you won't have any effect. The way I found that out was, I got my first laptop in about 1996, and I moved into it was 1993. I moved into a new house an old house in Venice at the same time. And I started getting all of this pain in my arms, and I thought, oh shit, I'm coming down with cancer again. So I was going to have to go through it and get rid of it, all of this. I thought, maybe something's in this house. So I had an environmental specialist come on with all of his meters and gadgets, go around the house. Only found one plug in the house that wasn't properly grounded. So I grounded that, crawled out of the house and grounded it myself. And then he said, turn on your laptop. So he turned it on, and he said, here's your problem.
The meter shot up to 100 milligauss. And only 3 milligauss is safe for a human cell.
100. Shooting up to 100, like this, pulsating up to 100. My hand's right on that area doing that. So he said, get a separate keyboard, keep it this far away, you can see where the die's off, and you have your hands there, no problem. The next, I went right out as soon as he left. Oh, I didn't let him leave the house. I made him sell me some of his gadgets, his meters. I would not let him out of the house until he sold me one of those meters. So I went out and bought a keyboard, put it in. Next day, I had no pain. Gone, just like that. So they're lying to you when they tell you the carpal tunnel is an angle problem. It is an electrical problem, an electromagnetic field problem. Those people who use cell phones, the test came in from Switzerland last year. Rats who were exposed to 40 minutes a day, only 40 minutes a day, had 36% brain cancer. That's pretty high, so you better get an earbud. Keep that thing away from your head. 40 minutes every day for a year is all it took for 36% of those, 36 or 38% of those rats to get brain tumors. It's not very long. And the rise in brain tumors since the cell phone came out, pretty high. So be careful. All these things are pollution. You need to be aware of what is going to lead you toward disease so you're not surprised by it, or you can alter it. If you do these things that you know can harm you, or that have been tested and shown to harm you, and you do them, then you won't be surprised if you get a disease. But if you're smart, you'll do things that avoid it, that'll prevent it. Of course, you may be one of the 68% or so that doesn't get, 60-some percent, 67%, 63% who doesn't get a brain tumor, 62% doesn't get a brain tumor. But how do you know which group you're going to be in? You're going to be in the 36%? Are you going to be in the 37%? Or are you going to be in the 63, 62%? Who doesn't? You don't know. So take care of yourself. Because it may be rising. With humans, it may even be worse. Because it may feed those rats a good diet. So I'll have less disease. And you know that they twist those tests in any way they can to make them look the best. And they even twist that one to make it look good, and you still come up with 36 to 38% brain tumors. That's not a good thing. Not a good thing at all. So disease, it's environmental, it's industrial, it's part of our modern society. Get as natural as you can get to avoid all of that disease. Now, we can reverse a lot of the problems, we can dissolve a lot of that stuff, we can take care of ourselves if we eat properly. Now, when you eat a raw food that's unadulterated and not dehydrated, all of the enzymes in it are bioactive. That means they disassemble quickly and easily with the enzymes in your body, and your body can redistribute them. The pancreas is very responsible for a lot of this. It will take those elements and it will restructure them so that you can utilize it for your purposes. Okay. So food in its raw state, vitamins, enzymes, minerals, nothing is cauterized. It's used. Cauterized, you know what that means? Take clay, you fire it, it's cauterized. It's hardened. It is brittle. It's no longer porous. Things can't pass, it can't disassemble. Clay, everything disintegrates. It becomes milky in water. It becomes a part of the water. It is the water. Once it's fired, it's a rock. It's a hardened substance. It's all cauterized together. That's what happens when you cook food. It cauterizes a lot of the substances in your food. Crystallizes the vitamin C. It crystallizes the B vitamins. And all you have to do is get up to 141 degrees to destroy 50% of your calcium. 50% of your calcium. And the way that the body harnesses, remember the poisons in your body? It uses calcium, phosphorus, magnesium, potassium as the main alkalinizing minerals to bind with some of those metals, toxic substances, to bind with them and neutralize their negative charge that is so destructive in the body. Even aluminum is highly destructive when it's cauterized. Aluminum destroys the zeta potential. Zeta potential is the ability for nutrients to remain suspended in fluid. So it's like you've got a lot of fish swimming around in an aquarium. You drop a bomb in there and they all sink to the bottom. They can't get up off the ground, off the bottom. They just stay there on the bottom. That's what cauterized aluminum does. You cauterize aluminum from anything. Aluminum pots, aluminum cans, soda pops, or whatever you're drinking. Aluminum foil, all gets into your food. It all gets into your system, cauterized. So you wonder why your brain doesn't work? You wonder why you can't follow thoughts? If you got aluminum in there, destroying the zeta potential. You got a synapse is about to fire out of an axon or a ganglia. And what happens? And it just slides on the bottom of the nerve tube. Just like that. Boom, just flat down. You went, why isn't that thought coming to me? That's the way I was as a child. No thoughts about language ever came. There was no completed thought on language. It didn't go anywhere. That part of my brain was completely neutralized until I started eating the carrot juice. Then it changed. carrot juice and the vitamin and the keratin in it may be a way to neutralize and bind because of the high calcium in it and the potassium in it to bind with that aluminum. And then my body was able to start transmitting properly through that canal, through those canals, that particular part of my brain. Calcium is very, very important. All the plaque on your teeth, mostly calcium. Why do you get plaque on your teeth? Because your brain has the most metals in it. Most free radical heavy metals are in the brain. Most toxins in the human body are in the brain. Where do they discharge? Tongue, the gums, the salivary glands. Sometimes the eyes and sometimes the ears. But mainly the gums, salivary glands, and the tongue. That's why you get a white coating on your tongue. Poisons are coming out through your tongue. Your body's using calcium to bind with them. So when you swallow it, it is already neutralized. It's already alkalinized. That acidity, that damaging acidity is neutralized. Now, if we're naturally an acidic body. As animal eaters, we need to eat animal tissue, animal substances to survive. That takes an acid system.
Now, naturopaths tell you that your blood, saliva, and urine should all be alkaline.
If they accomplish that, you will digest half of what you eat. Half of what you eat. Don't do it. Don't go alkaline. It's not right. No carnivore has alkaline urine or alkaline saliva. Check your dog and cat. Doesn't happen. Check your gorilla, your friendly gorilla. Doesn't happen. They're acid. They have to be acidic. But when an acidic compound is a free radical combined with metal poisons that free radicals are, you have to neutralize it with very alkalinizing minerals to just de-ionize it, to take the charge out of it, because the charge does so much damage in the human body. Calcium is very important. Phosphorus, potassium, magnesium. Other minerals too, but those are abundant in the foods that we eat.
When we cook above 118 degrees, all of the enzymes are destroyed.
All of them are cauterized by 122 degrees. All of them become unstable at 105 degrees. How well do you function at 105 degrees? You'll sit down and take a grape for the whole day and sit there with a fan in your face. Can you imagine it getting higher? 122 degrees. 140 degrees. Old pasteurization temperature was 141 for 15 to 30 seconds. That would destroy 50% of the calcium. But it kept the Lactobacillus caucasus and bulgarius from feeding on the fats and protein because it destroyed them, it killed them. Those are the bacteria that digest the fats and the protein in your milk, pre-digested for you. That is the bacteria you take in to your body to help you become a good digester, just like a calf or any other animal who has milk. That milk has the bacteria that introduces it to your system to digest the milk. It has acidophilus, caucasus, and bacillus. Varieties of those, varieties of all three of those. Caucasus is used to digest the protein, bulgarius to use the fat, acidophilus the milk sugar. Naturally, in milk, acidophilus is low. It isn't as important to us to digest the sugars. That's only 5% of our diet. It's more important to digest the protein and the fats. So the bulgarius is the highest. But what does that do to the milk? It causes it to go sour and bitter. Now, when I lived in Paris from 1993 to 1996, just 3 months of every year. I went up to the farmland. That's the only way you could get raw milk and raw cream. Everything was sour and bitter. That was normal. That's the way it's always been. Technology comes in and says, but we can make it sweeter. So they change your whole instincts, your whole appetite to say that this is proper. We like sweet things. We like it to smell good or a particular way. When if you go out to the farmlands and stuff like this, the Amish people, you know, if they're into the old way, everything is soured, everything is bitter. But it's pre-digested. The fats and the proteins are pre-digested. Not all just all the milk sugar with all the acidophilus. And that's what they tell you to eat. Acidophilus, acidophilus. Who needs all that sugar? We don't. The advanced glycation end products, evidence of that. 5% of our diet is all we need of sugars. So why do we put 5 to 6 strains of acidophilus to make yogurt and kefir? It doesn't make any sense. If you're looking at for health, if you're looking at for a particular taste advantage, it's not a healthful advantage on the whole body. It just has to do with taste. Well, then isn't it wrong or inappropriate or inefficient to be cultivating that taste bud in you? Absolutely. So get back in like the Germans. I like all that sour, stinky cheeses and stuff like that. Pretty healthy race. Thought they were all almighty, though, was a problem. You know. But they, you know, the Germans eat more steak tartare, 5 times more than any other country, even than France. You know what steak tartare is? Raw meat with raw egg mixed together. And they eat a lot of it in that country. A lot of it. More than France. So, getting the foods whole, uncooked, you will preserve your nutrients. People say to me, well, I'd rather die than change my diet. And I've had people with deathly cancer, 4-stage cancer, come to me and, you know, because this is before my book was out, and I send them to a seminar, and they take a seminar, or they come to me in an emergency, and I have to tell them, spend 5-6 hours, and they say, wait a minute. Because I used to do this whole thing for groups of people just to see if they wanted to become patients. And I'd have people walk out and say, no, I'd rather die of miserable cancer than change my diet. I like my waffles and syrup, and, you know, I like my cereals with all the, you know, acrylamides in it, you know, and all of that stuff. I have no judgment against that. It's their lives. They can die any way they want. They can live any way they want. I'm just giving you information to make you aware that there's other ways. There's alternatives to living and living without disease. So it's up to you. But I'm not going to judge you if you say, yeah, makes a lot of sense. It's probably true, but, you know, I'm going to eat my cooked food. You know, I'm going to have my Denny's whatever and my pizza and all this stuff. And my McDonald's, you know, it's okay. Even if you only ate one raw food your whole life, you're adding vitamins and enzymes and minerals. Even only one food your whole life. So the more you do that, the more you're feeding yourself good. Well. And the more you're putting toxins in, because when you cook foods, there are a myriad of toxins that are byproducts. And in my recipe book, I named 32 of them. And those are the only known ones. And you know there's sub-toxins that follow from those too. So, but there's 32 that I named. And acrylamides are now getting the high publicity. And they're one of the worst because a group of full professors in Sweden about 5 years ago did 8-9 years of testing. I don't remember quite which it was, 8 or 9 or even 10 years of testing. And they found that the tumors that they investigated, the that they looked at the chemical structure found that the highest content was acrylamides. So they looked at all the foods that had acrylamides. The highest acrylamides were in chips and French fries. Chips and French fries. No matter what kind of chip, no matter what kind of French fry. Boiled in oil, high carbohydrate, boiled in oil. Even trans fatty acids, oils, were worse, because then it was plastic and acrylamides on top of it. So that would increase the acrylamide content of 1,500 times in that food by boiling in oil. Most of your cereals, Sugar Crisp, my favorite. No wonder I got cancer. I ate boxes of that stuff, boxes of it, you know. Literally, I would eat 2 boxes a day sometimes, you know, once I lived alone. 3 boxes a day sometimes. And I loved that stuff, and, you know. I hated French fries until I hit 16, and I couldn't stop eating them with a mold, you know. I'd stick these hot, you know, French fries into a chocolate mold. And I loved that. Burn with the cold, you know, so, you know, I was not a good eater. I deserved every disease I had, but let me tell you, most of it, but, you know, I mean, that's the way I was raised. I didn't know anything different, and a diabetic, you're crazy. You don't have faculties, you know. I was already autistic, and being diabetic on top of it, the brain didn't work very well at all. So, in other areas, not just the communication center. So, eat raw foods, you get a lot healthier. Some people say, well, can I sear it? Yeah, you can sear it. Let me sear your arm for three seconds. What happens there? Because that's what you're doing to the meat. I mean, you know, people look at me and say, oh, God, that raw meat's so disgusting. You remember that movie, Alien, whatever it was, pardon? No, it was a TV series that came from the movie with James Caan and Alien Nation. They ate all raw meat and raw dairy, you remember? And James Caan sees them eating that raw meat. He takes his hamburger and throws his hamburger away because it disgusted me to eat the raw meat. And I said, okay, you think that's disgusting? What if I take a piece of your meat and boil the flesh? And it's smoking and crackling. What if I do that to your arm or your muscle? Is that more tasty than having something that's not burned and mutilated? And when I start giving that picture, they start going, okay, I got your point. Okay, I'm more disgusting than you are. Okay. And it is. It's more disgusting to me it's how you look at it, you know. But they're programmed to be afraid of raw texture meats, you know. So, you know, raw is definitely the way to go if you don't want toxins. You've already got enough toxins in your environment. Everywhere you look, everywhere you see, everything that's in your home is off-gassing some toxin. Paper off-gases. Plastic off-gases over 100 degrees. Dioxins that destroy molds, highly toxic, start off-gassing. Off-gas at freezing temperatures too. So you can take a piece of plastic and use it to heat something in it, you've got dioxins in it. You freeze, you know, they say you make some popsicles for your kids in plastic, dioxins are in it. You're going to have to make something out of glass, something out of pottery, something that's not going to outgas and that's not glazed. Design something. There may be some potters out there that can start designing stuff like this. And there are people that do it in local areas where I travel, and they start doing this and the whole community starts working together, you know, and you come to the potlucks. We have potlucks here once every 2 months. The next one is going to be on February 25th at our lovely hosts over here, place in the valley. So we're going to have a potluck there, and you get together and exchange and just start thinking of ideas how to make your lives better, and offering people. I have lots of people that have changed their lives and gone into business by helping people make their lives better. So brainstorm. Do something that you will improve everybody's life and yours, if you like, if you want that. Okay, so we've gone over enough about raw foods? No. Gone over enough about cooked foods? No. Like the toxins I was talking about, you have, in fats, you have a lot of lipid peroxides. Lipid peroxides, very carcinogenic. So when you cook a fat, it starts transforming into lipid peroxides at about 70 degrees. It's called the labile point. The labile point is when you see it cross that line. But you don't have to see it cross the line. I don't have to be dead to know that I've been ill before I'm dead. So the alteration on fats that I've seen on the effects on the human body with patients and with other people is 96 degrees. When fat is heated over 96 degrees, that's different with butter and cream and dairy products. But when you're dealing with nut butters and you're making your own nut butters, or you're using olive oil or coconut oil, when you get over 96 degrees, that's when you start altering the molecular structure so that it will start hardening in your body, similar to a vegetable oil, vegetable fat. You do not want a fat turning crystallized and hardened in your body, because that will lead to all kinds of problems. Cracking, dryness, arteriosclerosis, heart attacks, aneurysms, you name it. So any oil that's pressed, olive oil, coconut oil, peanut oils, any of those oils, you keep those down to a minimum and keep the temperature below 96 degrees. Now those fats, those oils, fats, are very specialized fats. They are not normal and common because it takes machinery to make them. And when we have machinery involved in something, it is always altering the chemistry. So what I have observed from these pressed oils is that they are solvent reactive. They, mainly 90% of the fats turn into solvents to dissolve compounds in your body. So it will cause intense cleansing. You wonder why you might get tired or lethargic and you're eating a half a cup of olive oil every day and you're getting dry skin and you're getting itching, you're getting a lot of fungus. It's because you're having something that's detoxing you too fast. And you need animal fats to balance that. So I suggest no more than 1 tablespoon of a pressed oil a day, or if you're going to have, let's say, you're doing a particular recipe, you're going to have 4 tablespoons or up to 8 tablespoons in a particular sauce. You skip that kind of oil, you skip any type of pressed oil for another 4 days before you have it again. Let your body be able to process it, because you do not want the body to use that oil to build a cell. If it does, it will crystallize in 2 to 3 years. You're in trouble. It's not going to be easy. You're going to have to get into a hot bath, 102 to 105 degrees for an hour and a half a day, 2 days a week, to melt it out of your system, to get it hot enough into your lymphatic system to get it to melt, or into the cell where it's made to get it to melt. Very strenuous, but it works very well. Had a 72-year-old man who was practically bedridden, and his whole lymphatic system was clogged, and that's what was wrong with him, just his lymphatic system. So I said, okay, I'm going to put you on this diet, and I want you to take a hot bath every hour and a half, and you do it 2 days a week, never close than 3 days apart, 2 days a week, and you do that, and let's see what happens. He'd get out of the hot bath, and he had to have his wife helps him out of the bath, takes care of him, you know. So then all of a sudden, 3 months later, He's out running. He started a new stem cell business, which is one of the only, because he's been on the diet now 6 years, 7 years. And, you know, having sex with his young wife. And, you know, he started a new business, a huge multi-million-dollar company at 72 years old. You know, it's a great thing. This guy took the hot baths, got his lymphatic system going. He's got another life. Huge life now. At 72 years old. He's supposed to be retired. Now he's got all this health and activity. 6 years raw diet, doing these lymphatic baths, keeps him clean and moving and running and alert. He only sleeps 5 hours a day, like me. Or I sleep sometimes 3.5. All this energy, all this go. So it can work for you. All right, now we're going to take another break, and then we'll go on the final lap.